All right. Hey there. This is John Chen's the Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast. And we are somewhere else. And we're going to find out where that somewhere else is with co founder of the platform called Versatackle, Robin Eastman. Hey, Robin, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, John?
It's beautiful. It's sunny out in Seattle. We're waiting for the temperatures to go back up, but not too far up. Every time it goes too far up, I overheat my office and got to turn on all my air conditioners. But speaking of air conditioners and stuff that's hot, today, what you can actually see here is Versatackle. And Versatackle is your invention, Robin. So, Robin, for my friends who haven't met you yet, tell them a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi, yeah, I'm Robin Eastman. My pronouns are she, her, and I am one of the co-founders of Versatackle. We wanted to create a platform for online events and meetings that centers accessibility, equity, and justice. So we basically wanted to create a space on the internet that encourages people to bring their full selves to it, where we think about accessibility first. We can't always be the most accessible. Um, or as accessible as we'd like, because accessibility can always be improved, but we're always thinking about that. And we like to create a space where people don't have to put on masks and can truly connect with other human beings.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Robin. What was the genesis of this idea? I'm sure you had a lot of things happen over the last 3 years or so. I'm just curious which of those items led to creating Versatackle.
Well, we actually started right before the pandemic, and we were inspired by seeing what we could do to limit climate change. Traveling for conferences is a big use
Big.
of carbon footprint, and we wanted to see if we could help people connect in natural and human ways on the internet, so people could feel like they're still getting that connection, knowledge sharing, and networking that goes on at conferences, but without having to fly around the world and spend carbon footprint. Then, of course, the pandemic hit. We stopped having to have the conversations about why you would ever want to meet online instead of in person. And everybody got on board with that. But we all started thinking about how can we do those online connections better. So that's what we've been working on for the last 3 years.
Well, it's amazing. Again, I have a lot of friends that are really looking at accessibility inside of virtual because it opens up a whole new avenue. They've been advocating for accessibility in in-person meetings, right? You know, things like what are some of the most graphic examples? What was one of them? It was somebody put the toaster for the bagels across in front of that. And what happens is if you're a person in a scooter or wheelchair, you have to reach across a hot toaster to grab a bagel. So those are things like people just in general don't think about and until you are in that situation. And I just think it doesn't create the welcoming environment. So what were some of your top challenges and some of the top features that you really wanted to put inside of Versatackle?
So closed captioning has turned out to be one of both of those. It's been really important to us, and I'm excited that we are one of the, quite possibly the only platform out there that
Don't we start people and keep more people? Show you got heart.
is a bit of a technical challenge. So we've been working really hard on making our closed captions bug free, and we are actually in the process of re-engineering them
Ooh.
so they'll work better for everyone. Uh, One of the cool things about accessibility, and I think you pointed out some of the important stuff, but it actually makes things better for everybody. There's the classic example of the curb cuts, where that was really pushed for to make sidewalks more accessible so that people with wheelchairs could use them. And as soon
Okay.
as we started putting them in, everybody realized how it makes everybody's travel experience better. Right. So we discover that more and more with different accessibility features. I think closed captions are a great example, whether or not you're hearing or deaf, or anywhere on a spectrum they're in, it can be really helpful to see what people are saying.
Yeah, as I get older, I do things such as watch Netflix with captions,
Yeah.
and so I see captions working for me, right? Do captions also work for you on your side? Do
Yeah. So, are
you have to turn them on too? Oh, and now I lost your audio. So we'll have to see. Oh, and of course, Robin is going to reconnect here. All right, let's see. I'm trying to turn on captions on my side here inside of Versatackle. I now see them. Oh, great. So there is a now caption I have here down below. I have those turned on, and you can see how they have the captions put inside of here. Key things that are here, which is that my name is inside of those captions. I think that's also key. And the second part is that it's in this font. So uh, Robin has really chosen to use the dyslexia font. So that's why this key font is here. This font is much more readable and was specifically designed for people who had dyslexia who could read it. All right, let's see. Robin,
Yeah.
I've got you back here. I'm going to have to put you.
Yeah, sorry about that. We ran into my least favorite bug right now that has been the most challenging to track down and squash, which is that sometimes closed captioning affects our audio.
Oh.
And yeah, we are scrambling to try and fix that. One of the challenges of being a small company is having to spread our resources out, trying to figure out how to both add features and not add bugs.
I was describing to people here too. So the captioning is shown in the dyslexia font. So I know that this font has been
Yeah.
specifically designed for people with dyslexia. Can you describe more why you chose this font and what advantages it has?
Yeah, so one of the important things in a font to make it more dyslexic friendly is to not have it be symmetrical. Dyslexia can make B's and P's and Q's and D's all look like the same letter. And the more symmetrical they are, the worse that problem gets. Another thing about this, so this font doesn't have that symmetry. Every letter looks different. It's also weighted so that the bottom of the font is heavier than the top of the font, which helps orient things in space. It's not a panacea. Like, it doesn't mean that people with dyslexia don't have any problem reading, but it can make a difference. And one of the things that we like to say is you're not limited to one disability. I think we have a tendency to think about able-bodied white cis men as the default, and then you get like one deviation from the default, instead of thinking of each individual person as like a holistic person that can have many disabilities and many traits and features. So when we think about accessibility, we think about how things intersect and how we can make it work for somebody who might be both deaf and dyslexic.
There we go. Thank you so much for that. And have you had your users come back? So some of your users with the dyslexia font come back and give you feedback that they appreciate that. Because
Yeah.
again, every other app is using some either Open Sans or some other default font.
Yeah. So what we found is it is helpful. We've also gotten the feedback that it's important not to just have black text on a white background, that's actually harder for people. So we try to have a little bit of a gray background. Some of these choices, we get feedback from neurotypical folks that they don't love it because it's not as visually appealing. I think that goes back to the symmetry that we really like. And some of that like high contrast white on black that we really like. And one of the things that we've made a decision about is that since we're going to center that accessibility, when we hear feedback from one community that says, this helps me access this more, we weight that feedback so much more heavily than someone who says, but I'm used to the world, everything just working, like all of the fonts being something that I think are pretty without me having to think about that. And so it's a little bit distracting to me to even think about the font. And we're like, you know what, actually that's great, because maybe when you're on our site, you'll be thinking about ways that you can be more inclusive, and maybe a little bit of that discomfort will actually help you be more present for other people.
Everyone's talking about the Ted Lasso finale, and so I looked up top Ted Lasso quotes, and he says, if you're doing something new, it's what do you say? It's a little bit like riding a horse. If you're doing it for the first time and it's comfortable, you're probably doing it wrong. So
Yeah.
I look at, on the platform, you're trying to teach new things. You know, in terms of also teaching new things, you have one of the most extensive pronoun lists that I have seen out of any platform. Can you talk more about your focus on pronouns and how they also help in accessibility?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that is so important to making people feel comfortable is to be able to have their true self acknowledged. And when it comes to gender, for some of us who are, oh, this is my cat, Bruce. He's coming to say hello.
Hello, Bruce.
His pronouns are he, him. Um, uh, when you're used to people defaulting to your pronouns, you don't have a moment of discomfort where you don't feel recognized and seen. If your pronouns are something that people misuse, if you get misgendered by pronouns, that causes a very severe sense of discomfort and can make you feel like you're not seen or heard. So we wanted to not only make sure that all of the pronouns that people might want to select were available in our list, but we also wanted that reminder when people join an event at Versatackle that you may be meeting people who have pronouns you're not used to, and to start getting a little more familiar with that idea before you're talking to somebody who has pronouns that you won't assume. So maybe some of that discomfort you can process in your own time instead of processing while you're talking to somebody new.
All right, Kirk Lewis is with us, and so is Diane. Diane recently was diagnosed cancer-free, so that's also good news.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So talk more about then moving tiles around. Of course, I just moved my tiles around here on screen, but you're saying that every user gets a choice about how they want to arrange their screen. So talk a little more about why you chose that.
Yeah, well, we wanted to make our platform as customizable as possible, so that you can set up how you want your visual to look. So you can move tiles, you can resize them. Some people really, really don't like looking at themselves when they're in a meeting.
Sure.
So you can make your tile really small and other tiles really big.
Mm-hmm.
And we just wanted to give that flexibility to everybody. It also can be really fun. My co-founder, Julian, their then 4-year-old, when we started, spent about an hour on a video chat with his grandparents. Usually have that attention span, but because he was playing around with the tiles, he was having fun the whole time.
The tiles are like the new fidget toy. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And for some of us, having a fidget toy is how we stay engaged.
Yes, absolutely. What communities have responded best to your platform? I'd love to hear, you know, like where Versatackle has really been embraced and seen as, again, a key advantage in some communities.
Yeah, I think people who are traditionally marginalized are really excited about being centered. So we've had communities, actually, we have a lot of burlesque performers who like our platform,
Okay.
which we think is great. We love that community, and people who are used to being thought of as a bit fringe. We don't think of them as fringe. We think of them as the people we love to celebrate. And it's such a joyful community. I think they appreciate that we have a little more color on our site. And definitely the pronouns and dyslexic font, and just thinking about accessibility.
And then the last piece, I think, on the feature list here of many features is your use of rooms. So you can create impromptu hallway chats. You can move around. Talk about what your design philosophy is on virtual rooms.
So this actually goes all the way back to the very beginning when we were thinking about online conferences and what people really need, what people really are excited to get out of in-person conferences are those impromptu conversations and hallway chats. You're not just going to a conference to download information, you're going to connect with people. Yeah. And so we were thinking about how do we make that possible? And part of the solution is giving people the flexibility to create your own rooms.
Oh, Robin, no, we got your audio cutting in and out, so we'll have to see if we can check your connection. Thank you so much. There we go. She's gonna, Robin's got, I know, an internet connection that does come in and out sometimes, so she'll be back here in just a second. Let's see here.
Sorry about that.
We got you. Let me bring you into the right spot. Go ahead and restate. So basically, we were talking about your use of rooms.
Yeah, so we wanted to give people the flexibility so that if I'm at a conference and I see that John Chen is there and I'm super excited to talk to him, I've read his book, I can send you a message and say, hey, John, I would love to talk to you. I'd love to share my platform with you. I'd love to hear about your book. If you are also excited to talk to me, I can create a one-on-one room and invite you to connect. And we can have that hallway chat like we would, like we might at an in-person conference. We also wanted to give people, we wanted our platform to be one where you could have an unconference. So that it wouldn't have to be all on a host. You could have individual people planning, creating rooms, moving around, and having that that rule that you get to vote with your presence, or you get to control where you're spending your time and your focus.
What's the most innovative use of rooms that you've seen in somebody else's conference that was on Versatackle?
So I thought it was really cool. We had a reading, and the authors each had their own room, so you could do like a meet and greet with authors. And one of the things that I thought was cool was there was this sort of natural coming together as people went and talked to the different writers, and then people moved on. The writers themselves started joining up rooms. So since you could move yourself around, and it ended up kind of at the end with the circle of the last people standing all being able to talk to each other. And it was a really great way to let that event kind of end naturally.
And why do you think self-directed, breakout rooms or room choices are so important? Zoom added it about a year ago. Some platforms still don't have it, but I'm curious on your side, Robin, why do you think that you being able to choose what room you're in is such an important factor for accessibility?
Well, if you're at an event, you never want to feel trapped somewhere, right? You don't want to be like, I thought this was the talk I wanted to be listening to, but it turns out not to be a good fit. And there's this other talk I'm excited about. If you're in that situation, you don't want to have to ping your host and say, I don't like this talk, right? You don't want to have to, you just want to be able to quietly ease out the door and quietly ease into another talk, right? And that means moving yourself around. There's also, there's so many times, I know I've sat in a bunch of meetings where the host is like, okay, hang on, ping me if there's a particular room you want to be in. And it just creates a lot of work that's not really necessary for a host.
Yeah, and it turns out that, my theory is that people, adult learners want choice. The more choice you give them, the better they are, because again, they get to choose. And other conferences like unconferences made what they called surfing and diving. Surfing is you can jump from session to session. It was okay to leave a session. There seems to be a lot of pressure, like societal pressure, to stay in a training, and I'm not like that, apparently. I don't care if I'm not getting what I'm not, if this just session is not for me, I'm just going to get up and leave, and hopefully that the speaker doesn't take it amongst himself. It's just not a good match for me. So that's where they really made the rules, were surfers and divers. Surfers were you could jump session to session. Divers, you stay in the session, you could stay as deep as you want. And so I don't know if that's some other conference norms that you've seen that have been best practices, Robin. Those are others.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think, ways that encourage people to be their genuine self.
Yes.
It's really, I don't want to spend, when I'm meeting people, when I'm in a learning space, I don't want to spend my energy feeling like I have to mask, like I have to pretend to be somebody different. I don't want to spend my energy sitting through something feeling like this isn't right for me. I want to spend my energy learning from other people. I want to spend my energy thinking about what is it that I have to share that's important. And
Yeah.
so trying to navigate social dynamics can be really challenging. And so we need to think about, as we're building platforms, how do we remove barriers to that? And I think one of those is that people aren't going to ask to be moved unless they really, really have to. You really want to be able to quietly slip out of a session. Nobody wants to hurt people's feelings, right? And nobody wants to be seen as that attention-seeking person. So those become barriers to that connection.
What is the most accessible virtual meeting you've seen, executed on your platform or any other platform? I'm just curious. I'm like, what really made you, sit up in your chair and saying, "Oh, these people really, really get accessibility"?
Yeah. I think what makes it feel like people really get accessibility is when people take the time to identify what are the needs in the room. And that can be an in-person room, it can be an online room. So when people take time to say in advance, I think a great practice is when you are setting up your event, is giving the info ahead of time, giving space for people to say what their accessibility needs are, and asking it in a really open-ended way, so that you are not limiting what accessibility is, but also offering examples to people of what potential accessibility options there are. Because sometimes if you say to people, like, what are your accessibility needs? People will think, well, I'm not in a wheelchair, I don't have any accessibility needs. And there's so many needs out there that can be met, that might just be like, hey, I'm going to need a bathroom break every hour.
Right.
And that can be like we're going to pause the session every hour for people to take a bathroom break, or it can be like just permission for you to pause your camera, pause your mic, and go take yourself off and come back, right? It can be as simple as that for people to feel like their needs are being met.
So as someone who specializes in accessibility, we have a lot of meeting professionals, meeting planners, especially virtual and hybrid. What are some of the top things, if you could just get some of these meeting professionals to think about in terms of accessibility, neurodivergent? I mean, they're definitely hot topics now. People want to do something. I just think there's not a lot of tangible items that people know to do that both cost effective as well as would make someone feel more welcome. What would you share with them as some of the top tips?
I think maybe the best one is build in breaks.
Okay.
And I think in online platforms, it can be really scary to people for to build a break, because you think, if I make a break, I'll lose people. If I take 10 minutes out, then people will leave and they won't come back. And the thing is, if people want to leave, they'll leave. But people got to go to the bathroom. um, but people have other needs related to it too. Like if you are introverted or autistic, you might need just a few minutes to turn yourself off and not be focused on other people. And giving that space allows people to refresh and come back and engage more, instead of wasting their energy pretending they're fine when they're not fine. And there's actually been quite a lot of research that says how important breaks are to meetings. So I think building in breaks, and I think modeling the behavior that you want to see. So that means, like, introduce yourself and say your pronouns. You don't have to tell people everybody needs to say their pronouns. In fact, it's really important not to enforce people sharing their pronouns, because some people might not be out yet. So if somebody skips over their pronouns, let them skip over their pronouns. But model the behavior that you want to see. So start out saying, I'm Robin, she, her pronouns. And then model the kind of behavior you want to see in terms of inviting people to speak and acknowledging the importance of what they've said. Model how you handle mistakes, right? So both to say, like, mistakes are okay, they happen, we're going to roll with them. And that gives freedom to other people. So I both feel like embarrassed that you've mistakes, because I definitely need you to have grace for mine.
Speaking of which, all right, my account needed to be reset here. So I'm resetting right now. And so that's clicking a few more buttons. I think that some of those things are really important. I while I'm resetting over here, I'm resetting some chats on my side. Is that I recently had an organization that really expounded saying mistakes are okay, right? And then I had a scheduling challenge where I had a client that didn't guarantee their dates until later. And when they did guarantee their dates, they were on the same date as this other program, even though they were like midnight, because they were both in foreign countries. And then they said, well, you can't be part of this program. And I really just got this cross message. It's really amazing when things are not in alignment. If you really take something and saying, you're saying this here, but this just happened, right? And this action is not, matching up what those actions are. I think that's a really key piece. So how to handle mistakes. I mean, one of the interesting parts around it here too is in the technology, of course, still has plenty of mistakes. I mean, one of the nice parts is when the technology gets out of the way. But it's so that you can really focus on the content. But when it doesn't, it's it acknowledging and how do you get through it, right? There are plenty of different ways where you can handle it in such a way so that you can get back to the content, right, with the least amount of impact. And I think we're all capable of doing that, but some people apparently have shorter fuses than other. I love your audio description. Your audio description is also really key. I think speakers is something that they can do, and I've heard as a best practice for accessibility. So doing an audio description of yourself. Hi, I'm John Chen. All right, I'm a Chinese American, 55 years old, black hair, today wearing a blue shirt, sitting in my beautiful office with the pronouns he, him, and his. And sometimes you can add other parts of it too, like I'm the descendant of a paper son. And you don't have to say anything more about it. But like, if people don't know, which about 99% of the planet doesn't know, is that it leaves people interested, engaged, going, well, what is that, right? And sometimes somebody will come back later and say, okay, I'm interested, right? What is a paper sun? I don't know what that is, and could you tell me more? I also think that on the building breaks, Robin, go search out Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek did research in January of this year, 2023, and talked about how important breaks were, right? Shorter is better than none. Outdoors better than indoor. So he gave like 5 or 6 really easy things about breaks that they're scientifically backed. And I think that it's very difficult. I have heard that mindset. I'm going to lose people if we have a break. I think it goes to the other side. You're going to lose people if you don't have a break.
Right. Yeah.
At some stage, right? And then how do you balance it out? Because the hard part is, like, we do have limited time with a lot of these content things, but at some point your content becomes irrelevant, because if people are no longer in a receiving state, then it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't really matter that people are doing stuff. So what's been the most engaging virtual meeting you've been on in the last 3 years?
Well, not to pander, but I really did enjoy the engaging virtual meetings workshop that I came to with you. I thought you did an excellent job. You really lived up to your name there. And there was some really cool stuff that you did with technology, but that wasn't, I think, the most important. I think you did a really good job of rewarding the behavior, of both modeling and rewarding the behavior that you wanted to see. So you really wanted people to speak up and engage. So when people did, you rewarded them for speaking up, even if it wasn't fully comfortable or wasn't fully part of your plan, right? You welcomed some emotion and some vulnerability into what you were doing. And I think that felt great. And I felt like, oh, I'm wanted here. People want to hear my story. People want to share their story. And that was really exciting and engaging.
Yeah, that's where I really come to my most recent conclusion, is that most, or if not all, virtual meetings can be made better with no additional tech. Right?
Yeah.
Once we get to this base level, your camera works, your audio works, right? We can chat, we can do some stuff. That once you get past that, there are so many things now in the way that people run their meetings that could be better. Right? Simple things such as, truly, I came from this conference in San Diego, 9,500 learning professionals, and they all still have, probably 40 to 60% of them have the number one problem is that how do I get engagement online? And my answer to that really is, you want engagement? Engage. What I mean is, like, allocate time for the audience to engage with you and really mean it. Not just like, are there any questions? No, I'm going to move on.
Yeah. Well, and you have to take risks. If you wait for other people to take risks, then you're not going to connect with people. If you really want to connect with people, you need to go up to them and be the one to say, hey, do you want to chat about this thing? And often the answer is yes. I think people are really scared that they're going to be judged. People are really scared that they're going to look awkward or weird if they talk to somebody who doesn't want to talk to them, but somebody's got to take the risk, right? And it might as well be you. And that's one of the things that I think about a lot is power dynamics. And I think it's really important for you to recognize power dynamics in a situation, and especially when you're in a position of power, to make sure that you take on more risks, right? So if you're in an environment that's comfortable for you, if you're the host of something, or if you are similar in a lot of ways to the host, right? That's a really good time for you to be the one people to share, and to be like, it's okay if I'm a little awkward, right? If I'm awkward and friendly, then then
Yeah.
that gives permission for other people to be a little awkward. And it's really hard to talk to people for the first time and have there be zero awkwardness. So it's a much better strategy to just embrace it and accept it and take it on yourself.
Now, you talked about modeling, and I do believe that modeling is an underrated facilitator or host skill. And modeling to me really comes around, right? Show people what you're going to do. So modeling can, a lot of times too, if I'm going to ask for a vulnerable story, I will share a vulnerable story myself. And also the other tactic that's actually really behind it, let's say if I ask, a challenging question, when's the last time you were vulnerable in a virtual meeting? Let's just say that that's the question. One of the best things that I can do though is stall for some time for people with, different processing, whether introvert, extrovert, or I'm thinking about the story, or I'm just accessing memories around that. And so I'll tell a story, I'll plan to tell a story for like a minute or two. So that people have time to think, right? If I just go like this, Robin, tell me a story, right? She's like, what? Why? No, I'm gonna turn my camera off, right? But if I go
Yeah.
and say something like, tell me about the last time you were vulnerable on a virtual meeting, and say, here, I'll give you an example. Like last time I was on a virtual meeting and we were talking about, divorced parents, right? So I'm actually from a divorced family, and my parents got divorced when I was the age of 6. And so, divorce is one of those topics, right? And I didn't take it so well. Actually, I was okay for a while, but it was like 6 years later that it really affected me. And because you never know how these things work out, but that's when it really hit me harder than when it actually happened. And so that's why I have a lot of empathy for kids and even adults who have some kind of trauma, saying that the trauma is not always immediate, right? The trauma can sometimes show up, right? The trauma maybe is immediate, but the effect of the trauma can sometimes be greatly delayed. And divorce is definitely one of those people where kids automatically, or many kids, might want to say, oh, I'm fine, I can handle this, when it's really bigger than that. So anyway, so that's like, an example
Yeah.
of saying, how being vulnerable in a virtual meeting. So I don't know,
Yeah.
Robin, if you have other examples or great best practices is in modeling for you.
Yeah. I mean, I think another couple important things to pull out from that example that you just gave is it gives something for people to anchor to, like not just time and space to think about it, but vulnerability, there's a really wide range of vulnerability. Sometimes it can
Right.
feel vulnerable to even just like say your full name, right? Like even things
Yes.
that
Yep.
can be, you know, like even just like opening up and like going around the room and saying, where you're from can feel vulnerable. Or,
Mhm.
telling the story of like your deepest trauma, including like all the hardest scary parts. Like there's this whole range, right? Um, and you
Yeah.
don't
Yeah. Yeah.
necessarily, even when you're inviting people to be vulnerable, you don't necessarily want to invite people to trauma dump, right? And tell like this is not, you don't necessarily want people to go into the darkest, scariest part of their life, right? So giving them a point along that vulnerability spectrum to anchor to that says like, yeah, this happened to me. It was hard. Here's some of the things that I learned from it. Here's some of the ways that helped me build empathy and compassion, gives
Yes.
people to be like, okay, here's how much to open up. Here's what you're asking for in terms of opening up. And I think that's so helpful. Um,
Well, I've seen the inverse of that too, Robin, which is if you go further, like you said, a vulnerable question, but you share something like really, really vulnerable, quite often the effect in the audience is that they will reconsider what they were going to share, right? And sometimes share more now that you've shared more. And so this is really that reciprocity as a host and as a leader. I think that's super important. And that's, you talk about accessibility. That's one of the things people talked about is like virtual meetings can be transactional if you only stay on that surface level, right? But if you go deeper, I think that's where a lot of the things are happening now in 2023. Like, how do we get real work done? How do we get deeper work done? How can we do some,
yeah,
sometimes emotional or other driven things with that.
yeah,
Robin, you developed a platform which is great, and you really you saw some things that were not happening. I'm just curious for Robin Eastman, what are some features or things or wishes that you want to see, into the future? Let's just say 5, 10, maybe even 20, 30 years. What's some things in virtual that you want to see?
So there's a lot, like you were talking earlier about technology getting out of the way. So there's a lot of things I want to have happen that makes the platform fade out, right? So I want
Mhm.
us to get better and better at how we create an environment that you don't notice the environment is encouraging you to be your genuine self. You just feel like I can be my genuine self here, right? I like to say, people ask me a lot, like, what's the big differentiator of your platform? And I say, we don't have
Right.
a big differentiator. We're trying to have 1,000 little differentiators that just invite you to be your
Oh,
genuine.
that's a good one. I would
Um,
continue to use that.
so that's what I want to keep striving towards. There's some like really cool features that I want to implement. I want us to do something that I like to call banquet tables, where you can be have small groups in a room together listening to a big presentation. So as if you had a stage at a banquet room, somebody talking, and
Mhm.
each of the banquet tables could have their own little side chats and sense of community as they're
Yes.
listening together. So I'm excited for that
You can
feature.
have sidebar, right? Sidebar
Yeah,
conversation, which is like,
yeah,
can you believe she said that? Right? Things like that. Yeah, I think that's
yeah.
very important.
I think that's very important. It also like is more fun. I think fun things are really important. Gamification can be a big buzzword, and as someone who's a total board game nerd, it drives me
Yeah.
bonkers when I see like things where I'm like, oh, they tried to gamify it, but it's not fun. Gamification should be
Right.
fun.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be like gamification. It can just be like, how do we make this be more fun? Um,
You got to talk to my friend at Town Hall. They built something on Zoom and they're about to make it for all platforms, which does start to gamify your engagement inside of a virtual meeting. And they're talking about having even a currency such as an engagement coin that you could spend on something as the meeting was done or after the collection of meetings was done. So those are
yeah.
interesting points too.
Well, and something else that's sort of related to that that I think would be really great to see is some tools that help us recognize when we're not being as inclusive as we want to be. So,
Mm.
fun fact that's not so fun. Um, on average, if you're in a conversation that includes both men and women, women talk, or on movies, women have about 27% of the dialogue. Um, but the
Right.
perception is that women talk more than men. And if you're in a space where there's men and women are talking 50% of the time, the overwhelming feeling is that women are dominating the conversation. And that's really not okay, that is how we perceive things. And it also means we can't trust our perception about it. So there's the potential for technology to help us understand if we're talking more than we want to be talking, or that could help encourage
Yeah.
us to be like, hey, you haven't shared, especially if it's just telling you, like, you could take up more space here. This would be a great place for you to take up more space, and you deserve to take up
Oh.
that space.
Two tools that are doing that now, Yoodli, YOODLI.ai, is analyzing videos and giving you percentages, which is great in one-on-ones. You can actually see a percentage of who talked who. And I'm happy to report I'm pretty much 51-49 in a lot of the conversations that I had. But, when they're 70-30, they're distinctly lopsided, right? And I know I had some people in there. The other one is Phantom. I think it's FANTTHOM or TOM. Phantom.ai is another AI that logs into meetings, and it's now got what do they call it? Monologue. It's got a monologue meter. So when you start talking, like when I start talking in this segment, It will not stop the timer until you start talking or somebody else starts talking. So it'll tell you if you've been monologuing for like 3 or 4 minutes, like you should probably stop now. so those are some things where technology, I hope one day would actually really help us out and be more accessible, more complete, more inclusive with that. Robin, if there's only one thing people would remember from this interview, what do you want that one thing to be?
Embrace discomfort. Like, embrace the discomfort of taking the risk to reach out to people. Embrace the discomfort of thinking about being in spaces that weren't built for you. And thinking about how we can build spaces for more people. And if you can spend a little bit of time leaning into that, we'll create spaces where people can be more of their genuine selves. And that's what we really need.
Outstanding. Thank you, Robin. Of course, we put all your information inside of there, versatackle.com. And I believe there's some kind of free trial, right? You can try the platform out. Is that right, Robin?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have an $8 a month subscription, and the first month of that is free. So you can try it out. And we have some other subscription options. And of course, we are open to flexibility. So you can reach out to me if you want to find something that works specifically for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robin. And I hope you enjoyed this Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast on a very different platform. And hopefully you found some of these parts better. I love the closed captioning at the bottom. I know my good friend Joan Eisenstadt's going to appreciate that. Thank you again, Robin, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much, John. It's always lovely to talk to you.
Don't we start people and keep old people? Show